Hey everyone, tonight we're heading somewhere a bit darker, a world full of disease, punishments, and watered-down porridge. Forget those Hollywood fantasies of knights and shining castles. The reality? Medieval life was brutal. Chances are, you wouldn't even survive a day. Before we begin, be sure to like the video and subscribe. Only if you really enjoy this kind of content. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this global community come together, dim the lights, and maybe turn on a fan to set the tone with a soft background on. Let's begin tonight's journey together. You just open your eyes in the year 1325. Good news, you're still breathing. Bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a bug-infested straw pile that still smells like it came straight from the barn. Forget about pillows or luxurious sheets. You got a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't seen water since last winter. At this point, it weighs almost as much as a small cow, thanks to months of filth. You stir awake as the distant bell tower tolls. It's a medieval alarm clock, louder than you'd like, and far less merciful. Your house is a single-room wooden hut. No windows. Just one big open space where your entire family, the animals, and ecosystem of bugs all live in harmony. And the smell? A powerful cocktail of stale ale, unwashed bodies, farm animals, and a scent you desperately hope isn't mold. But deep down, you know it is. Air fresheners haven't been invented yet. Not that it would matter. The candle would just melt into your dirt floor anyway. You try to stretch, but instantly regret it. The air bites with cold, and your limbs ache. You're 22 years old, which, by medieval standards, means you're middle-aged. Your spine pops like an old door hinge, and your knees crackle like a sack of gravel. Getting out of bed is a risky business. The floor is either damp from last night's rain leaking through the roof or crusty from whatever your neighbor's chicken left behind. Barefoot, your skin touches the ground, and just like that, you're now part of the local food chain. Privacy? Not a chance. Your entire family, and probably a cousin who never moved out, all share the same room. There's no such thing as bedrooms, no curtains, no me time. It's all community all the time. Welcome to your average morning in medieval Europe, where solitude doesn't exist because you're always surrounded by fleas, rodents, and 8 other breathing people. And this is just how your day begins. You manage to crawl out of your medieval straw nightmare. Congrats! But now, nature is calling, loudly and rudely. This is the part where you start missing modern plumbing. There's no toilet, no seat, no paper, no flush, not even a bitter old plunger shoved in the corner. In the 1300s, relieving yourself is part survival, part social activity, and occasionally a public performance. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is probably a wooden bucket behind the house. Unfortunately, it's already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a bad reaction to last night's turnips. The smell? Absolutely biblical. You brace yourself, get over with, and then here's the kicker. You toss it into the street. Yes, the street. Custom dictates you yell "Garde de l'eau" before dumping your bucket from the window. That's Old French for watch out below. But let's be honest, no one ever moves fast enough. The roads of medieval towns are basically open-air sewers, a lively stream of human waste, animal droppings, and mysterious fluids you'd rather not identify. If your town actually has public latrines, congrats. You get to sit elbow to elbow with strangers in a wooden shed where privacy is non-existent and fresh air is a fantasy. You might try to strike up a conversation. Just don't breathe too deep. Toilet paper? Doesn't exist. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, old cloth, moss, or, if they're feeling fancy, a bit of wool. Sometimes they use nothing at all, which might explain why people weren't exactly shaking hands back then. You'd think things are better in a castle, right? Well, sort of. You might be lucky enough to have access to a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist straight into the moat. Great idea in theory, until you realize your enemies know about it. Yes, attackers have literally climbed into castles through the poop chute. So, yeah, welcome to the Middle Ages, where even your toilet could be a backdoor invasion route. And if you're thinking, but what if I live in a castle? Surely it's better, right? Well, not exactly. You might have access to a garderobe, essentially a hole in the wall where your waist drops straight down into the moat. Sounds clever until you realize your enemies are well aware of it. And yes, some attackers have literally climbed into castles through the waist chute. Let that sink in, breaking into the medieval back door. So whether you're tilling fields or running the manor, using the bathroom in the Middle Ages is basically a ritual of shame. It's cold, exposed, unsanitary, and always revolting. One wrong step on a slick stone path, and suddenly your face is in humanity's leftovers. And guess what? You haven't even brushed your teeth yet. But don't worry, we'll get to that. You survived the bathroom ordeal. Surely you've earned something nice, like a warm breakfast? Well, not in medieval Europe. Here, comfort is a foreign concept. If you can even call it breakfast, it's a bleak and miserable experience. There's no eggs Benedict, no coffee machine sputtering to life, and definitely no avocado toast. Instead, you crouch near the fire with a wooden bowl filled with something that looks like it came off the bottom of someone's boot. Welcome to your daily serving of pottage, a thick, mushy stew made from whatever ingredients were lying around. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you got lucky. It's been bubbling in the same pot for days, sometimes even weeks. New ingredients aren't mixed in. They're just dumped into the same pot, layered over whatever was left from before. It's not so much a meal as it is a long-term stew experiment. And on the side, a chunk of bread, so dense it could block arrows, made with rough rye or barley flour. It's often patted out with sawdust, crushed acorns, or whatever fill you can scrape together. Because wheat, that's a luxury fantasy for the rich. This bread isn't your companion. It's your opponent. You don't slice it. You wrestle with it. As for something to drink, forget orange juice or fancy oat milk lattes. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is full of filth, teeming with parasites. So weak ale is a safer bet. Low in alcohol, high in survival. Even children drink it. Nobody loves it. But at least it won't kill you immediately. Hoping for a little meat or cheese. Keep dreaming. That's for Sunday feasts and religious holidays, and only if your local lord is feeling generous. For most peasants, meat shows up on the plate just a few times a year, if that. And fresh fruit? Only if it's in season and hasn't already been turned into something alcoholic. As for spices, don't even bother. Unless you wear a crown, pepper is more expensive than your monthly earnings. Even salt is valuable enough to be locked up, so you chew your gritty bread. Sip your morning ale, and try not to think about the rat that might have tasted your porridge while you slept. Breakfast doesn't boost your energy. It just exists. It happens to you. That's it. And now, having eaten the saddest meal imaginable, it's time to work like your life depends on it. Because it absolutely does. So, your depressing medieval breakfast is over. Now it's time to get dressed. Not that it changes much. Your closet? One outfit. Literally one. Probably a ruffled tunic or a linen shirt you've worn every day for months. Maybe even years. There's no new season style here. You wear it until it falls apart or gives you a skin infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, you've got a linen undershirt. If not, you're going full commando beneath layers of sweaty, itchy wool. Hand-stitched by someone who probably didn't want to be stitching it. You're wearing nothing underneath a scratchy pile of sweaty wool, stitched together with love and zero understanding of what a proper seam should look like. And as for laundry, forget it. There's no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no chance of finding a dry cleaner. Your clothes are stiff with filth and smell like a compost been left to rot in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, the process is brutal. Dragging water from a stream or well, boiling it, scrubbing your tunic with ashes or lye, then hanging it out to dry, assuming the sun makes an appearance, which it rarely does. Now let's talk shoes, if you even have any. They're usually made of rough leather, barely held together with thread, and offer about as much support as a soggy tortilla. Most peasants just go barefoot, trudging through mud, manure, and medieval surprises like jagged rocks and disease-filled puddles. The result of all this? Your skin is at war with you. You itch nonstop. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have moved in rent-free. Everyone has them. Lords, monks, kids. You're basically a mobile insect colony. It's normal to see someone casually scratching themselves with a spoon while chatting with the village priest. Nobody even notices anymore. Your skin is raw from constant irritation, and your scalp feels like a battlefield covered in tiny bite marks. Develop a rash? Too bad. No doctor, no ointment, no clue. Odds are it's scabies, and you're just stuck with it. If you're lucky enough to avoid infection, great. That rash is now your long-term medieval companion, tagging along for the next 6 months. So now you're fully dressed in discomfort and layered in misery. It's time to head outside and work yourself to the bone. You're wrapped in damp wool and crawling with bugs. Perfect time to greet the day with a smile, right? Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is risky business. Not emotionally, dentally. The problem isn't emotional, it's dental. No toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. Oral hygiene is about as fashionable as bathing, meaning hardly anyone bothers. A few people chew on sticks or rinse with vinegar or old wine, but that's about it. For most, teeth are on their own and not doing great. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something out of a horror film. Cavities run wild, gums are swollen, and those dark patches on your teeth? That's not leftover stew. It's rot. Your mouth contains more decay than a root cellar in the dead of winter. Sugar isn't everywhere yet, but the rich are starting to import it, mostly to flaunt their wealth or sweeten expensive pastries. If you're a noble, congrats. You get to destroy your teeth faster than the poor. Peasants take the slow road to dental disaster, chewing gritty porridge, fermented bread, and grinding through a lifetime of hard, rough food. Toothaches? Get comfortable with them. They're like medieval background noise, always there, always miserable. It's the kind of relentless pain that makes you turn to prayer, wine, or your own pair of pliers. That's not a joke, that's the treatment. No dentist, but barber surgeons were happy to rip teeth out by candlelight. Yes, the guy who cuts your hair also yanks out your molars using an iron hook. And no, there's no pain relief. If a tooth gets infected, say hello to fever. With no antibiotics, a simple infection can turn into sepsis and kill you. That's right. Something we treat with a quick trip to the pharmacy today could have ended your life in the 1300s. And don't expect your love life to help either. Kissing? Good luck. Bad breath or halitosis is everywhere. If you're single, nobody's checking your smile. They're checking your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a war zone, and it's losing badly. Now that your teeth are aching, it's time to head outside, because the real back-breaking part of your life is just beginning. Time to go to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no breaks, and absolutely no promotions. If you're like 90% of people in the medieval world, your mission is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work land you don't own. For a noble who probably couldn't pick you out of a crowd, you rise with the sun and keep going until it dips behind the trees. Your tools? A splintered hoe, a rusted sickle, and whatever bones in your body haven't quit yet. There are no weekends, no time off, just a relentless rhythm of sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. And Sunday? It's your one break, but only if you're not, unless you're harvesting, fighting off raiders, or desperately praying that your infected toe stops turning black. Sunday is your only day off. The labor is relentless. Fields are worked by hand, unless you're lucky enough to own an ox, which most aren't. You dig trenches, plant seeds, pull out weeds, and haul water until your spine starts to resemble a bent question mark. No one's checking in on your well-being. No one's asking how you're holding up mentally. Exhaustion is part of the job. And if you're a woman, surprise. Field work is just the beginning. You also raise kids, cook, clean, spin wool, feed animals, and try to ignore the lice crawling over from your husband's side of the bed. As for kids, they start contributing by age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake, and a lifelong dream of not dying from a simple cold. And if you're one of the rare people who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a leatherworker, or a barrel maker, congrats! You still spend your days surrounded by open flames, harsh chemicals, or rotting animal parts inside poorly ventilated shacks. The pay? Just enough to stay alive. The benefits? Occasional bleeding. Break a bone? Tough luck. Get a fever? Drink some warm, weak beer and get back to it. Taking time off is an option. If you don't work, you don't eat. It's that simple. And if you're too sick to work, no problem. Someone else will take your place. Problem solved. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep pushing forward. Because in medieval Europe, your job isn't a livelihood. It's a slow-motion endurance test. And now that your back is screaming from a day in the fields, let's take a minute to talk about the weather. In medieval times, the weather isn't just seasonal. It's an ongoing punishment from above. Let's begin with winter. No insulation. No heating systems. No stormproofing. Just wooden walls with gaps big enough to throw a chicken through. Your windows? Covered with. Your windows? Covered with cloth, not glass. The hearth sounds cozy, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it burning. Firewood is pricey, and collecting it yourself? That could get you executed if you pick the wrong stick from someone else's forest. So you wrap yourself in your one soggy wool tunic, sit close to the faint glow of coals, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet stay cold and wet, your hands so numb they feel like medieval popsicles. No one diagnoses frostbite. They just call it bad luck. And when summer finally arrives, you think it'll be a relief, but no, it's just a different kind of suffering. Your house turns into an oven made of wood and dirt. No fans, no breeze, and definitely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't strip them off. Showing too much skin is considered improper and invites sunburn, bug bites, and public shame. Flies swarm your body, attracted to your unwashed scent and the goat stew fermenting in the corner from last week. Mosquitoes was around your ears all night, assuming you can sleep with the constant noise of neighbors shouting and babies crying. Out in the fields, the sun roasts you. No sunscreen, no hat, unless you turn some straw into a makeshift sunshade. And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke isn't a condition. It's just called a bad turn. So whether you're freezing in winter wondering if your toes will make it to spring or dripping in sweat with chafed thighs, one thing never changes. Your clothes still itch. Your food still sucks. And your next miserable task is always waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. Spoiler, there isn't any. Feeling thirsty? Want to splash some water on your face and snap out of this muddy fever dream? Too bad. In the Middle Ages, water is not your friend. It's plotting your slow demise. Let's talk about drinking water. That beautiful stream nearby looks clean, sparkling, even, but it's lying to you. Someone just dumped their toilet bucket upstream. And if not that, maybe a dead pig is floating in it. Every sip is loaded with bacteria, parasites, and microbial army ready to destroy your insides. That's why most people drank beer. Yes, even kids. But don't picture medieval keg parties. It was weak ale, low alcohol, high survival rate. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than anything flowing through the local drainage ditch. Wine was another option, if you were rich and didn't mind being tipsy before breakfast. Now, what about bathing? Surely water was used to stay clean, right? In theory, yes. In practice, not really. People actually believed that washing opened your skin to disease. That's right. Staying dirty was considered healthy. If you never removed the crust of grime covering your skin, you were thought to be more protected. Bathhouses did exist, but they quickly got a reputation as places for scandal, gossip, and, let's say, extracurricular activities. Naturally, the church stepped in and shut many of them down. Even if you wanted a bath, it was a full production. Fetch water from the well, boil it, pour it into a wooden tub that leaks, and hope nobody uses it before you, or worse, after. Rainwater? It sits in open barrels. Perfect for bird droppings, bug breeding, and moss parties. Refreshing? Not really. So whether it's for drinking, bathing, or farming, water in the Middle Ages isn't your lifeline. It's a daily gamble. Take the wrong sip, and you're sweating through your final hours in a straw bed, holding your stomach, and rethinking every decision you've ever made. Next time you take a sip, so next time you turn on the tap, raise your glass to the people who came before us. They didn't have the luxury of safe drinking water. Hydration always came with risk. Maybe you drank the water. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like failure. Either way, you're sick now. And you need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in medieval times, where healthcare is basically holy torture with a side of superstition. Let's begin with diagnosis. No matter what your problem is, cough, rash, broken limb, or early signs of plague, the answer is the same. Your body's fluids are out of balance. These fluids, or humors, were four in total: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Medieval medicine claimed that staying healthy was about keeping this internal soup evenly mixed. Running a fever? That's too much blood. The cure? Drain it out. Yes, really. Bloodletting was the go-to fix, either by cutting you with a dull knife or letting leeches suck it out. And who performed this? Often your local barber. Because nothing says qualified like someone who trims beards and opens veins. So you could leave with a fresh haircut and less blood than you walked in with. 2-for-1 special. Feeling depressed or anxious? Clearly you got too much black bile. The fix? Laxatives. Maybe a hot herbal cleanse. Maybe just a round of prayers while your friends quietly start building your coffin. Now, let's say you break a bone or get a nasty wound. This is where it really goes downhill. No anesthesia, unless you count passing out from sheer agony. Surgery was performed with knives that hadn't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools were heated over fire, not to sanitize them, but because it looked intimidating. Antibiotics? Not invented. Germs? Never heard of them. People believed illness came from bad air or because God was upset about something you did. Got stomach cramps? Probably because you had impure thoughts. Start repenting while vomiting. And if your condition gets worse, they might double down with more leeches, crush bugs, or maybe just send for priest. Because at that point, they're prepping you for the final cure, death. And if by some miracle you survive, they assume divine mercy saved you. The doctor gets praised. The leech gets a promotion. So yes, medieval medicine wasn't about getting better. It was about surviving the treatment. Now, after a full day of hard labor, lice infestations, and bloodletting, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back into your drafty hut, stomach growling, excited for the one comfort left in life. A hot meal. Bad news. Your food is probably trying to kill you, too. Let's start with the basics. There's no such thing as proper food storage. No fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or praying that cold air keeps things from spoiling. And your meat, if you're lucky enough to even have some, has likely been hanging there for your meat? It's been hanging for days, swarmed by flies, soaking in suspicious marinade, and possibly sampled by a rat or two. Bread is a foundation of the medieval diet, but even that isn't exactly safe. In years when crops fail, people stretch the dough by mixing in tree bark, sawdust, or even dirt. And if it's rice season, get ready for a special surprise. Ergot, a toxic fungus that causes seizures, vivid hallucinations, and sometimes death. Think of it as a loaf laced with both LSD and lockjaw. Vegetables? Only when they're in season. And guess what's always in season? Turnips. Endless turnips. Boiled turnips. Mashed turnips. Turnips floating in stew. That stew, by the way, also known as pottage, is basically a bubbling mystery swamp that's been simmering since before your grandfather was born. Fruit? You might get some in autumn, but it spoils fast. Sugar? Forget it. It's insanely expensive, reserved for the wealthy as a way to flaunt their decaying teeth. Dairy? That's a gamble too. Milk goes bad in a matter of hours. Butter and cheese hold up a bit better, but they're bacterial minefields. People eat them anyway, because the alternative might be boiled shoelaces. Let's talk flavor. Want pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg? Too bad. Those spices cost more than your family earns in a year. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, maybe a bit of salt, and mostly pain. Most meals taste like soggy cloth dusted with despair. And food isn't just a health hazard. It's also political. Wild animals, they legally belong to the local lord, not you. Catch a rabbit for dinner, and you risk a fine, jail time, or even execution. That's right. Your humble stew could cost you your life. So as you crouch by the fire, staring into a bowl of gray mystery slop, remember, every bite could be your last. But you eat it anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food isn't about feeling full. It's about surviving the test. The sun's gone down. You've worked, suffered, and tried to digest your sketchy dinner. But don't get too comfortable, because God is watching. Then there's Agnes, the neighbor who will absolutely turn you in if you skip Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part life, it is life. The church governs your calendar, your laws, and your education, if you're lucky enough to be literate. It oversees your birth, your wedding, your funeral, and everything in between. Think of the church as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on the rent. Your entire day revolves around church bells. Morning, midday, and evening, those bells aren't just for show. They signal prayer time, and skipping it is considered a sin. Forget to bow? That's a sin. Eat meat on Friday? Sin. Dream about your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And yes, hell is not just real. It's terrifying. Priests describe it with graphic enthusiasm. Rivers of fire, oceans of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and endless screaming. If plague doesn't scare you, the threat of eternal torment certainly will. Reading the Bible yourself is an option. It's written in Latin, reserved for clergy, monks, and the one noble kid who's too delicate for manual labor. You depend entirely on the priest to tell you what it says and what it means. So if the priest says your crops failed because you didn't pray hard enough, better get back on your knees. Tithing, giving 1/10 of what you own, is required. Wheat? You give wheat. Chickens? You give eggs. If you have nothing to give, congrats. You're spiritually broke and materially doomed. Holy days. There are a lot of them. And while they give you a break from work, they aren't for leisure. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing, and remembering that joy is suspicious. Doubt is dangerous. Heretics are burned. Witches drowned. Blasphemers whipped. Ask too many questions, and you'll find yourself corrected very quickly. So you follow the motions. You chant. You kneel. You pray that after this mud-soaked life, your soul might make it a paradise, assuming the priest is fond of you, because while God may be forgiving, the church is considerably less so. Think being a medieval peasant sounds bad? Try doing it as a woman. Same misery, same hunger, same fear, but now add childbirth, obedience, and being completely invisible in society. Being a woman in the Middle Ages is like playing on nightmare difficulty with no healing potions and no save file. From the moment you're born, your path is pretty much fixed. Marry young, have babies, serve your husband, and die exhausted. Education? Unlikely, unless you're from a nobility and sent to a convent. Most girls stop learning by the time they can churn butter and mend a hole in a tunic. Marriage? It happens young. Really young. Being promised to someone at 12 and pregnant by 14 isn't unusual. It's not about romance. It's about land, animals, and political ties. Your feelings don't factor in. Once you're married, you're essentially your husband's property. Your role: produce children, feed the household, manage the home, and most importantly, don't complain. Because complaining might earn you a reputation as a nag, or worse, get you accused of witchcraft. And that label comes with a lovely bonus: being drowned or burned, depending on what's trending in your village. Childbirth? It's a high-stakes gamble. No prenatal care. No clean tools. No pain relief. Midwives try their best, but even minor complications can end in tragedy for the mother, the baby, or both. Some women make it through a dozen births. Others don't survive the second. But once that baby arrives, congratulations, your workload just doubled. Now you're caring for a newborn in a bug-infested shack, expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still show up in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, people look at you with suspicion. If you're widowed, you're seen as vulnerable. Speak your mind? Now you're dangerous. Women who didn't inform were often labeled as witches, especially if they knew how to use herbs, had a strong voice, or simply gave someone the wrong look on a rainy afternoon. Even in the church, your role is tightly restricted. Nuns lived under rigid control. No talking unless allowed. No freedom to move around. And your spiritual rank? Always beneath the men. So if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, your life comes down to 4 commands. Endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer quietly. And ideally, do it all while smiling. Because even during an era defined by suffering, women were still expected to endure it gracefully. So far, you've dealt with filth, hunger, inequality, and probably a belligerent goat. But just when you think your day can't possibly get worse, here comes violence. Loud, messy, and often totally normal by medieval standards. Let's make one thing clear. The Middle Ages were not peaceful. Law and order basically meant, hope your local lord isn't in a bad mood today. Violence was part of everyday life. In homes, in alleyways, on battlefields, even inside churches or while waiting for bread. Crime was everywhere. Punishments were brutal. And justice? More about public performance than actual protection. Steal bread? You might lose a hand. Caught in a lie? Your tongue could be pierced. Talk too much gossip? Meet the scold's bridle. A lovely metal muzzle with a tongue bar, designed to correct your attitude. Now let's say you're accused of something major, heresy, theft, or witchcraft. How do you prove you didn't do it? Easy, by being tortured. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version. Plunge your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If your hand heals clean in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, guilty. Another version. You're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, guilty and punished anyway. It's like a twisted medieval game show where survival is a prize and the rules are designed to make sure you lose. Sentence to death? That's not a private matter. That's entertainment. Executions are public spectacles. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, often with a cheering audience. Some people even bring snacks. It's basically medieval Netflix. Domestic abuse? Entirely normalized. Husbands weren't just allowed, they were expected to discipline wives and children. Street fights were as common as muddy roads. Look sideways at a noble's horse? You might get beaten. And war? Always brewing. Whether over land, religion, or just long-standing grudges, someone's always off to stab someone else. In the name of honor, God, or just plain boredom. Violence wasn't the collapse of society in the Middle Ages. It was society. Everyone lived knowing that life was fragile, justice was random, and your neighbor might cave your skull in over a pig. So tread lightly. Keep your head down, and don't trust anyone holding a blunt object. By now, you've survived lice, leeches, filth, violence, and public humiliation. But there's one more chapter left, the final, inevitable ending to most medieval lives. An early and very unremarkable death. If you're still alive and breathing past 40, congratulations. You're basically a local legend. People might even call you the Old One, not as a nickname, but as a statistical shock. Let's put that into perspective. Average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, and that's mostly because so many kids didn't make it past 5. Half of all children died young. All it took was illness, hunger, or one especially cruel winter. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no second chances. If you managed to survive childhood, adulthood didn't offer much of a break. You started working around the time you could stand upright. By age 25, your joints creaked louder than a monastery door. You might be missing a few teeth, a finger, and most of your original enthusiasm for life. For women, childbirth was a main danger and one of the leading causes of death. No anesthesia, no surgical backup, just boiling water, whispered prayers, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a pile of straw. Men weren't safe either. Their threats were different, but just as deadly. Farming accidents, infections from tiny cuts, a neighbor's drunken temper, or a crusade that went horribly wrong. Even walking to the market could end badly if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry taxman. Then there were silent killers. Plague could empty a town in days. Famine could starve out for seasons. Death didn't always arrive with a sword. Sometimes it came through spoiled food, one bad bite, and you're hallucinating your way into the afterlife. And funerals? If you were lucky, someone said a prayer before tossing you into the ground. No embalming, no satin-lined caskets, just a dirt hole, a quick blessing, and a patch of earth, assuming there was room left in the cemetery. So yes, life in the Middle Ages was short, harsh, and always under threat. There was no retirement. One day, you simply didn't get up again. And speaking of exits, let's wrap up with your final act, the collapse of the medieval dream. So how was your day? You woke up in grime, used a bucket for a toilet, cleaned your teeth with hope, nearly blacked out from hunger, worked until your spine begged for mercy, itched through wool, begged the skies to spare you from disease, and narrowly avoided being executed for the crime of owning a squirrel. Welcome to one normal day in medieval Europe. Thinking about becoming a knight? Better think twice. That fantasy version of the Middle Ages, with noble warriors, ladies in high towers, glorious battles, and feasts under candlelit chandeliers? That's all fairy tale fluff, shaped by legends and fiction. The real medieval world? Harsh, dirty, and deeply unequal. Your social status was your destiny. Born into poverty? You stayed there. Born into wealth? Congrats. You had better odds of making it, but still just one bad stew away from dysentery and a shallow grave. Even the privileged weren't safe. Castles were cold, smoky, flea-infested fortresses full of arranged marriages and backstabbing politics. Sure, you had fur robes and wine, but also a coin-toss chance of dying in battle or from a splinter that got infected. Not exactly the life of luxury. Those so-called simpler times were anything but simple. They were grinding. Every task took forever. Everything hurt. Even eating or giving birth could have serious consequences. Life wasn't restful. It was a daily battle for survival. And if you ever had a second to dream, to wish for something better, tough luck. There were no opportunities to climb out. No doctors, no what's this rash, internet searches. You were born, worked, and died within a few miles of the same patch of land. But here's what's truly amazing. Despite all that, people still laughed. They sang. They loved. They told stories and shared hope. Not because life was easy, but because humans are unbelievably resilient. Even in the bleakest times, they found ways to hold on to joy. So tonight, when you lie in your clean bed with running water, medicine, and climate control, take a moment, whisper a quiet thank you to the modern world and to the generations who battled starvation, disease, and feudal lords. So you wouldn't have to. They endured the darkness so you could live in the light. Before she became a reformer, a ruler, and a symbol of fierce ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born as Sophie Friedrich Auguste von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she came from a minor noble family in a quiet German principality. Her homeland in Pomerania held little influence on the world stage. But Sophie herself? She possessed something far more powerful than a title. Keen intelligence, disarming charisma, and an unshakable hunger to rise above her station. Her childhood was anything but easy. Her mother, Johanna, was ambitious and emotionally distant, a woman more concerned with court connections than tender care. Her father, a Prussian military man, remained a quiet, detached presence. Early on, Sophie learned how to survive in cold rooms filled with sharp expectations. She devoured books, mastered languages, and studied people before speaking, skills that would soon mean everything. She learned to stay observant, to blend in and to measure her words, a survival strategy in the cutthroat world she would soon enter. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia sought a bride for her nephew and heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russian borders. Peter himself was German-born, and Elizabeth believed a foreign bride, one who was grateful and obedient, would be easier to mold. Sophie was ideal. Noble, Protestant, though that would change, and known for her composure and modesty. At just 14, she was summoned to the harsh, frozen capital of St. Petersburg. Wrapped in light German garments and a carefully composed smile, she arrived in 1744, pushed forward by her mother like a carefully placed pawn. But Sophie had plans of her own. To survive and thrive in Russia, she converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, adopting a new name, Ekaterina Alexievna, Catherine. The conversion wasn't just religious. It was a personal transformation. It meant cutting ties with her past, stepping fully into an unfamiliar world, and accepting that there will be no return. No one watching that poised young girl in a fur-lined cloak could have imagined what she would become: a rebel, a ruler, a legend. From that moment forward, Sophie stopped playing someone else's game and began designing her own. Her marriage to Peter wasn't a fairy tale. It felt more like a prison, though it was meant to secure her place in the Romanov dynasty. It only strengthened her resolve to one day seize real power. Because Peter, the man she was meant to call husband, was no prince from a storybook. He wasn't the gallant prince of fairy tales. Peter was awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He preferred staging pretend battles in his private rooms over learning how to govern or connect with his wife. Some historians even believe he delayed consummating the marriage for years. He admired Frederick the Great of Prussia and disliked nearly everything about the Russian court. Catherine, however, approached her new home with tireless commitment. She studied the Russian language, absorbed its history, and practiced the rituals of the Orthodox Church. While Peter looked for ways to distance himself, Catherine worked to make herself part of Russia. But the gap between them wasn't just personal, it was political. The Russian court was a treacherous place, full of suspicion, whispers, and fierce rivalries. Empress Elizabeth still held the throne, but her health was fading fast. Everyone sensed a shift was coming, and each player in the court had their own secret strategy. Catherine lived under constant surveillance. Her letters intercepted, her companions watched, her steps measured. She couldn't rely on her husband, her ambitious mother, or even the staff around her. Trust was dangerous. A simple rumor could turn an ally into an enemy overnight, but Catherine adapted. She studied the court the way one studies a storm, silently and thoroughly. She earned respect from military leaders, built friendships with intellectuals, and kept her dignity intact. Her poise stood in stark contrast to Peter's erratic behavior and disdain for Russian culture. In secret, Catherine devoured the works of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. Where others saw her as just a polite consort, she was quietly crafting a new vision for herself and for Russia. But she faced a major obstacle. As long as Peter lived, her future remained trapped in a powerless role. Catherine had waited long enough. She knew the crown wouldn't just fall into her lap. She would have to take it. By 1762, after nearly 20 years of careful observation and strategic patience, her opportunity finally arrived. Empress Elizabeth had passed away, and Peter, now Peter III, had ascended the throne. But from the start, his rule began to crumble. In a matter of months, Peter managed to offend nearly everyone. He angered the clergy, alienated the nobility, and upset the military. He even praised Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy, and reversed policies that had defined Elizabeth's reign. He disrespected the church, embarrassed Russian tradition, and made no secret of his plan to divorce Catherine and marry his mistress. Support in the palace evaporated quickly. The court grew uneasy. Army officials, many of whom admired Catherine, whispered their discontent. Even everyday Russians, proud of their faith and heritage, viewed Peter as a foreign ruler who didn't respect their ways. Catherine saw the chaos and moved swiftly. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his countryside estate, Catherine staged a bloodless coup. With the help of powerful military leaders, including her partner, Gregory Orlov, and his influential family, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia. She was declared Empress Catherine II, earning the full support of the elite imperial guard. Peter, stunned and politically isolated, surrendered in just a few days. He was taken into custody, and not long after, he was found dead under murky circumstances. The official cause? Intestinal complications. The unofficial one? Assassination. Catherine was now ruler of Russia, not through birthright or marriage, but through sheer courage and calculation. A foreign-born woman with no legal claim had just seized the Russian Empire without drawing a single sword. But taking the throne was only the beginning. Now, she had to turn her daring rise into a lasting reign. Would the Russian elite accept her? Would the nobles fall in line? Could she keep the empire united? Catherine knew that the same tactics that earned her power could also be her undoing. So she set out to rule not as a plotter, but as a true reformer. That marked the start of a revolution, from master strategist to enlightened monarch. She would reshape borders, champion intellectual progress, and redefine female leadership on the world stage. She could have stopped there, held on to power, and called it victory. But Catherine wanted more. She dreamed not just of ruling, but of transforming Russia itself. Her ambitions weren't just military or political, they were intellectual. While Peter had fixated on toy soldiers and idolized Frederick the Great, Catherine admired the philosophers of the Enlightenment, thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot. She embraced ideals like reason, education, and the idea that rulers should serve their people, even though she held total power herself. But Catherine didn't simply study Enlightenment thought, she lived it. She wrote to Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while justifying her autocracy. She invited Diderot to visit her court, and even bought his entire personal library to support him financially. Behind the palace walls, she buried herself in books on law and philosophy, debated reforms with advisors, and personally shaped plans to modernize the empire. Early in her reign, she launched a massive effort to revise Russian law. In 1767, she created the Legislative Commission, a bold initiative to rewrite the empire's outdated legal code. Her own document, the nakaz or instruction, read like a political manifesto, arguing for legal equality, denouncing torture, and urging monarchs to act in the public's best interest. For an 18th century Russian ruler, it was a revolutionary stance. But ideals met resistance in a country where feudalism ruled and nobles clung to their power. Catherine understood this reality. While she pushed for progress, she also treaded carefully. She ended certain torturous punishments, expanded secular education, and founded schools and libraries. Yet, to keep the nobility on her side, she reinforced their authority over serfs. This was Catherine's constant balancing act. Outwardly a philosopher queen, but behind closed doors, a shrewd political operator. She walked a fine line between Enlightenment ideas and the harsh demands of Russian governance, between the refined salons of Paris and the gritty realities of Moscow. Her dream for Russia was bold, but always calculated. She wasn't trying to make Russia European. She was shaping it into a modern power, but on her own terms. Reform, yes, but enforced with firmness wrapped in elegance. And reform wasn't enough for Catherine. She wanted to grow the empire, not just within its borders, but beyond them, into a realm that would command admiration and fear. She didn't just build Russia, she expanded it. Under Catherine's leadership, the empire's borders stretched wider than ever before. Her wars weren't simply defensive. They were strategic campaigns to reshape Europe's geography. One of her most defining conflicts was with the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in the 1760s and 1770s, were about more than land, they were about power. Catherine styled herself as a protector of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, positioning Russia as a spiritual and military guardian of Eastern Europe. Under legendary generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russian forces seized critical territories, Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and those long-coveted warm water ports. These victories weren't just strategic, they were symbolic. Each conquest announced to the world that Russia was no longer a backwater. It was a serious European power. And Catherine wasn't done. She turned west, helping orchestrate the partitions of Poland. Alongside Austria and Prussia, she dismantled the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By the final partition in 1795, Poland had vanished from the map, and Russia gained vast territories and millions of new subjects. But Catherine expanded more than borders. She expanded influence. She founded cities, grew trade, and invited German settlers to develop Russian farmland. The empire became a patchwork of cultures stretching from icy Baltic shores to the sunny lands near the Black Sea. And through it all, Catherine remained at the center, reading dispatches, issuing orders, and personally managing her empire's expansion. Her critics called her greedy for land, imperialistic even. But Catherine saw expansion as her imperial duty. A great monarch, she believed, wasn't just a thinker. They were a builder. She didn't want to simply rule Russia. She wanted to mold it into a modern empire, powerful, respected, and absolutely loyal to her. Yet for all her accomplishments, Catherine was equally famous for what happened behind palace walls. Not all of it involved books and policy. Her love life became legendary. She had numerous lovers, often younger, handsome, and politically useful. She made no effort to hide them. In fact, she often rewarded them with titles, land, and pensions, as long as they remained loyal. If they didn't, they were quietly dismissed with a handshake and sometimes a promotion. The most notable of her lovers was Grigory Potemkin, a brilliant mind, a fearless leader, and perhaps, some believe, her secret husband. Together, they not only shared affection but co-led major reforms, military campaigns, and the development of southern Russia. He wasn't just a romantic partner. He was her political equal in many ways. Still, Europe couldn't ignore the scandal. Gossip ran wild. Satirical pamphlets painted her as wild, unstable, and overly indulgent. After her death, the slander grew worse, including the infamous, entirely false rumor involving a horse, a grotesque invention by enemies to taint her memory. Why such vicious attacks? Simple. Catherine was a woman who ruled with confidence, without apology, and in a world dominated by men that made her dangerous and unforgettable. Women of her time were expected to be saints or martyrs. Catherine chose neither. She refused to fit the mold. She lived fully, loved deeply, and ruled without apology. That made her powerful and threatening. Oddly, while critics accused her of moral excess, Catherine was deeply thoughtful about both love and sexuality. She saw pleasure as part of the human experience, not something shameful. To her, romantic connections didn't have to interfere with leadership. She separated personal affection from state duty, something few male rulers ever did. Many of her relationships were calculated. She chose partners who were loyal, smart, and politically beneficial. And when their usefulness ended, she let them go, usually with kindness and a generous farewell. Far from weakening her power, Catherine's love life helped reinforce it. Her mix of charm, passion, and political instinct made her unforgettable and intimidating. But even with all her command, danger still loomed. In 1773, that danger appeared in the form of a scruffy Cossack named Yemilian Pugachev. He wasn't just another rebel. Pugachev boldly claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's dead husband. According to him, he had escaped death and returned to reclaim the throne from the foreign impostor. It was absurd. Peter was long gone. But to the suffering and desperate lower classes, truth didn't matter. They didn't need facts, just hope, and Pugachev offered plenty. He promised freedom from serfdom, lower taxes, and land for ordinary people. His message ignited the lower Volga region, gaining support from peasants, Cossacks, and religious dissenters. In a time when the divide between nobles and serfs was painfully wide, his promises felt like salvation. The Pugachev rebellion exploded into the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Villages fell, forts were seized, and aristocrats were killed. For a terrifying moment, it looked as if the empire might collapse. This was an external enemy Catherine could negotiate with. It was a rebellion from within. But Catherine stayed steady. She acted swiftly. She deployed trained imperial troops to crush the revolt with brutal efficiency. By 1774, Pugachev's army had collapsed. He was caught, caged, and publicly paraded in Moscow, then executed by beheading. A grim message to anyone thinking of rising up. In the aftermath, Catherine tightened her grip on control and authority. Her vision of freeing the serfs quietly disappeared. The uprising revealed the harsh truth. Idealism had its limits in a country still bound by feudal chains. Catherine now leaned more heavily on the nobles, securing their loyalty by granting them total power over their peasants. This marked a turning point. The ruler who once praised Voltaire now valued order more than philosophy. Reform slowed. Surveillance grew. Even a whisper of revolt was treated like fire, extinguished before it could breathe. Pugachev was gone, but the fear he left behind lingered. It reminded Catherine that a kingdom built on injustice couldn't last forever. By the time Catherine approached the final chapter of her life, she had ruled for more than 30 years, longer than any woman in Russian history. From the moment she took the throne, she shattered expectations, transformed her country, and rewrote the role of monarch and woman alike. Under her reign, Russia wasn't just large, it was powerful. Its borders grew by over 200,000 square miles, including Crimea, sections of Poland, and key stretches of the Black Sea coast. These weren't just land grabs, they were strategic wins, giving Russia vital sea access and reshaping its economy. But her influence wasn't limited to territory. Catherine left an indelible mark on Russian culture. She helped create the Hermitage Museum and built one of Europe's greatest art collections. She wrote letters to Enlightenment icons and made her court a center for refined taste, knowledge, and creativity. To outsiders, Russia had once seemed old-fashioned. Catherine changed that, putting the empire on the cultural stage of Europe. She modernized schools, opening education to girls, and encouraged the spread of books and ideas. She even brought smallpox inoculation to Russia, decades ahead of much of the world. She even took the vaccine herself, a bold move for science in that era. But her rule was full of contradictions. Despite embracing Enlightenment philosophy, she never abolished serfdom. In fact, she expanded it into even more regions of Russia. Many of her reforms, though admirable, were largely surface level, refinements that modernized the image of the empire without truly changing its foundation. Nonetheless, Catherine's reign brought both consistency and ambition. She knew that power wasn't something passed down. It had to be shaped, protected, and earned. Her strength came not from divine authority, but from strategy, intellect, and tireless effort. She was labeled many things: manipulator, dictator, innovator, temptress. But above all, she got results. By the time of her death in 1796, Russia was larger, richer, and stronger than it had been in generations. She left behind a stable throne, an expanded realm, and a legacy that would live on for centuries. Catherine didn't just occupy the throne, she commanded it with sharp insight, calculated decisions, and a firm grasp of power. In doing so, she became not just an empress, but a legend. Despite all her achievements and the empire she built, Catherine the Great was still, at heart, a woman navigating a world built by men and molding it in her own image. Behind every royal painting and official proclamation stood a leader acutely aware of how fragile her position truly was. She wasn't Russian by birth. She rose to power through a coup, and she governed a land where few accepted a woman at the helm. But instead of faltering, she flourished. Catherine never settled for being symbolic. She studied constantly, wrote endlessly, and pushed herself to learn more every single day, reading reports, handling diplomatic letters, revising government documents, managing a court filled with rival factions. She wasn't content to simply sit on the throne. She worked the throne like a leader born to it. She was also, in many ways, alone. Despite being surrounded by courtiers, lovers, and artists, her memoir spoke of how few she could truly trust. Her son, Paul, whom she deeply distrusted and excluded from governance, became the man she feared might undo all she had built. Her most profound emotional connection with Gregory Potemkin slowly shifted into a friendship, but his death in 1791 left a scar that never healed. Catherine mastered image-making. She knew the strength of a narrative and used it more skillfully than most rulers of her time. She projected herself as Mother of Russia, an enlightened monarch, a warrior empress, and patron of the arts. But behind these public roles was a woman who endured betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and never stopped. When she passed in 1796, she left a nation transformed. Yet questions remained. Could she have done more to abolish serfdom? Did political compromise dilute her ideals? Was she truly a reformer or more of a tactician? History gave her a title she never claimed for herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was always just her kind. It was because she seized power and used it by her own rules. In a world that believed women had no place holding any, she didn't merely wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to be worthy of one. Deep in the humid jungle of Chiapas, southern Mexico, the ancient ruins of Palenque still whisper tales of the Maya. Massive temples rise above the treetops, their carved stone faces weathered by centuries, but filled with mystery. In 1994, one of those mysteries was revealed. A team of Mexican archaeologists, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, explored Temple 13, a lesser-known pyramid beside the famed Temple of the Inscriptions, final resting place of King Pakel the Great. They hadn't expected much from it, until they found something strange. A sealed, untouched chamber beneath the structure. No looters had entered. It was untouched. Breaking through and descending into the dark, the team found a heavy stone sarcophagus. Silence hung thick as they opened it. A red dust rose, vivid, startling. The interior was coated with powdered cinnabar, a ceremonial and toxic red mercury, sulfide used in Maya rituals. And in the middle of the crimson dust was a skeleton, a woman. She had been laid to rest with care. Her bones fragile but undisturbed, her skull crowned by a jade mask, and precious jewelry and offerings placed around her as if she were royalty. Diadems, ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. Everything about the burial screamed royalty. Yet no name was inscribed. No glyphs identified her. It was one of the richest female burials ever found in Mesoamerica. And yet it was a total enigma. Why was she buried in red powder? Who was she? Was she a queen, a priestess, or perhaps even Pakel's wife? The researchers called her the Red Queen, and the name stuck. But even with modern forensics, they couldn't say for sure who she was. Only that she had lived around the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers had been hidden, untouched, and purposefully isolated. Her burial wasn't just ceremonial, it was spiritual. This woman wasn't meant to be remembered with words. She was meant to be remembered through ritual, through color, and through the mysteries she left behind. The most haunting feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't her jade jewelry or the silence of the sealed chamber. It was a red dust. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar covered everything. The sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, even the offerings around her. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar, made from crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances in the ancient world. Its vibrant red color wasn't just visually striking. It symbolized blood rebirth and the life force that connected the human and divine realms. Red was sacred. It was a color of sunrise, of sacrifice, of life emerging from death. And it wasn't just symbolic. It was spiritual. Covering the dead in cinnabar was a ritual meant to transform the body, preserving it not for eternity, but for transition. In Maya belief, death wasn't the end. It was a passage, a crossing into another cosmic layer. And so the Red Queen, whoever she was being prepared not just a burial, but for deification. But there's another layer to this. Cinnabar is toxic. Repeated exposure can lead to mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, even death. The Maya may not have understood the chemical dangers of cinnabar, but they certainly grasped its power. It was volatile, potent, and sacred. Bathing a body in cinnabar wasn't a casual gesture. It was a declaration. This person was no ordinary mortal. In the city of Palenque, very few were granted such an honor. One of them was Pakel the Great, the king whose towering pyramid still dominates the ruins. His body, like that of the Red Queen, was also immersed in red powder. This parallel fueled speculation. Was she his wife? His mother? Or perhaps a priestess of equal divine standing? Her skull had been placed on a layer of jaguar skin, an animal deeply revered in Maya belief. Around her lay obsidian blades, bone needles, and small jade figurines. Each item hinted at ceremonies either performed by her or in her honor. Her burial, silent yet rich with symbolism, told a story of immense spiritual power. She wasn't being sent into the underworld quietly. Her funeral rites were a celebration, a transformation. Every detail, especially the rite of sacrifice, declared her passage into the next realm with reverence and ritual. The tomb surrounding the Red Queen shimmered with jade, obsidian, and shell, a silence broken only by their sacred gleam. These were not simple trinkets. They were sacred offerings, tokens chosen to guide her spirit through Zabalba, the Maya underworld. Necklaces of jade were laid at her sides. Though cold and heavy, they glistened even after 13 centuries underground. Jade symbolized more than status. It was life itself, green as maize, as a jungle canopy, as divine breath. Only the highest elite could carry such treasure into the grave. For the Red Queen, jade adorned her chest, wrists, and ears. It marked her not only as someone powerful in life, but perhaps also touched by the divine. Among the most haunting pieces was her jade funerary mask, resting gently over her skull. It echoed other royal death masks, not of gold, but something even more sacred, the green stone of immortality. A delicate jade funerary mask had been laid across her face. Unlike the grand, golden mask of Egypt, this one was subtle, a mosaic of countless small tiles shaped to match the curves of her skull. It wasn't just decoration. The mask held ceremonial meaning. It was meant to protect her soul, retain her identity, and present her as divine before the gods. Near her remains, bone needles, obsidian blades, and seashell artifacts were carefully placed. These might have been ritual tools, or perhaps symbols of her role as a priestess, a healer, or matriarch of great status. One bone pin bore a faint inscription, a whisper from the past, a personal echo left behind. At her feet, and lining the perimeter of the tomb, were sealed ceramic vessels. These likely once held food, drink, or incense, offerings meant to nourish and guide her spirit in the next life. To the Maya, the afterlife was no rest. It was a perilous voyage through multiple levels of existence. These items weren't luxury. They were survival. To a modern eye, the tomb feels intimate, not opulent, but deeply intentional. There were no gold treasures or elaborate chariots. Every object was chosen for spiritual importance. It was more than a burial site. It was a blueprint for the soul's transformation. Through this sacred arrangement, we glimpse a worldview where death marked not an ending, but an ascension. The Red Queen wasn't being laid to rest. She was being prepared to rise. And yet, amid all this ceremony, one mystery remains. No name, no glyphs, no written memory. The sarcophagus stood blank. The walls told no story. Her identity remains cloaked in silence. She was someone of immense power. That much is clear. But who? Since the discovery of her tomb, scholars have worked to unravel the puzzle, try to match evidence with history. One theory, more compelling than the rest, proposes that she might have been. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Tizakbu Ajah, the wife of Kinich Pakel, known to history as Pakel the Great, the most renowned ruler of Palenque. But Tizakbu wasn't merely his queen. She was born of noble blood and married into the royal family, while still young. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, all of whom held elite positions, and she played a key spiritual and political role during her husband's reign. If anyone deserved a burial of this magnitude, it was her. What supports this theory even more is the location of the tomb, just steps from Pakel's own elaborate crypt inside the Temple of the Inscriptions. That kind of placement likely wasn't an accident. It suggests a deliberate burial of a royal couple side by side in both rule and death. Then there's the use of cinnabar. Only 2 burials at Palenque feature such a heavy concentration of this red mineral. Pakel's and that of the Red Queen. That connection feels far too specific to dismiss. But that's where the mystery begins to deepen. Scientists performed DNA testing on both skeletons in hopes of verifying the relationship. However, the results turned out to be inconclusive. The woman's remains showed no clear maternal genetic link to Pakel. Still, that doesn't disprove a marriage. Spouses don't need to be biologically related. Some experts believe she may have been Sak Cook, Pakel's influential mother who held power before he came of age. Others think she might have been a royal priestess, a sibling, or even a revered ancestor whose name faded from the historical record. But most clues continue to point toward Tizakbu Ajah, queen by title, mother of heirs, and spiritual equal to Pakel. The absence of her name might not be accidental. It may have been an intentional part of Maya burial tradition. In their belief system, a person's soul lived on not in carvings or written glyphs, but through sacred rituals and symbolic echoes from the land itself. That is why the Red Queen still lingers today, floating between fact and legend, a ruler not remembered by name, but by presence, a figure whose legacy whispers through ancient earth and sacred dust, a woman who ruled, remembered not with words, but with mystery. She left no legacy in inscriptions, but rather in red pigment and sacred silence. To truly understand the Red Queen, we must understand the world she lived in, a world where royal Maya women possess more authority than many today would expect. In Maya culture, political power was deeply rooted in family. Royal women weren't just background figures. They acted as spiritual leaders, diplomats, and power brokers. They led ceremonies, commissioned temples, and ensured dynastic continuity. Their bloodlines were vital assets, used to form alliances and legitimize royal claims. Consider Kuk, the mother of Palenque the Great. When the throne of Palenque was left without a ruler, she took control herself. She governed as queen regent until her son was old enough to rule. She wasn't merely holding the place. She made decisions, oversaw government projects, and shaped the kingdom's future. Without her, Palenque might never have ruled at all. And she wasn't the exception. Across Maya cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions reveal women leading major rituals, taking part in diplomacy and war, and at times, ruling outright. In carvings and murals, they're shown in ornate headdresses and royal garments, often standing beside kings, or even above them. Their words were inscribed in glyphs. Their presence was undeniable until it faded. By the time Spanish conquerors arrived, those stories had already begun to vanish. Viewed through colonial eyes, indigenous women were seen as silent shadows in a male world. But archaeological discoveries tell a different story, one where authority was shared and negotiated. It wasn't only inherited, it was earned and exercised. This history reframes the Red Queen's significance. Though we don't know her name, her honored burial beside Palenque tells us she was central to power. Her jade mask wasn't a mere ornament. It was a sacred emblem of her status, her identity, and her eternal role in the royal order, a foundational force within the royal structure. Her jade mask wasn't a mere ornament. It embodied her very essence, a symbol of her role in life and her sacred status in death. Her lineage may have been the thread holding Palenque's royal house together. In Maya culture, a queen was far more than a royal partner. She was a guardian of divine ancestry, a ceremonial voice, and a vital connection between mortals and the gods. Though we don't know her name, she was never truly silent in her world. The Red Queen wasn't only laid to rest with riches. She was entombed within a structure steeped in symbolism, spiritual meaning, and cosmic purpose. Her resting place was more than a burial site. It was a passageway to eternity. Her body was uncovered within Temple 13, a relatively modest pyramid near the sacred center of Palenque. Yet its location, just steps away from the massive temple of the inscriptions, where King Palenque lies, speaks volumes. These temples weren't randomly placed. They were built with reverence, aligned with celestial events, ancestral stories, and royal lineage. Temple 13 might not rise as high as its neighbor, but what it hides is even more profound, a secret preserved for over millennium. Its interior remained untouched by looters, sealed and sacred, a hidden chamber deep within the temple's stone heart. To reach her crypt, one must ascend a narrow, winding staircase, a symbolic path downward into the Maya underworld. The tomb itself is minimal. Cut stone, no murals, no glyphs, only silence and darkness, preserved for 1,300 years. But that absence of writing may be intentional. This chamber wasn't meant to tell her story. It was meant to transform her. At its center rests her sarcophagus, a large limestone container resting like a sacred altar. It mirrors the grandeur of Palenque's own stone coffin, positioned just next door in his towering pyramid. While Palenque's lid bears elaborate engravings of myth and afterlife, carvings to recount her story. But perhaps that silence was intentional. This was not a chamber for the living to decipher. It was a sacred place for the dead to undergo transformation. At the very center lies her limestone sarcophagus, rising like an altar, solemn and deliberate in its construction. It mirrors the grandeur of Palenque's stone tomb next door. While Palenque's coffin is etched with images of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's chamber speaks more quietly. Its focus is intimate, on her body, on the red powder, on the sacred act of departure. Still, subtle architectural details offer meaning. The tomb faces east to west, mirroring the sun's passage from life to night. This alignment wasn't decorative. It was symbolic, a pathway of the soul, guided by light into the darkness beyond. The space is compact, yet resonant. It feels crafted with devotion, as if embracing someone deeply revered. To the Maya, temples weren't just buildings. They were spiritual instruments, channels connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld. To rest within such a temple was to ascend beyond mortality. The Red Queen's tomb wasn't an afterthought. It was intentional, sacred, a monument where death was not final, but a gateway. Her remains lie encased in stone. Her spirit, in the crimson dust that clings to her bones. Her story is carved not in glyphs, but in the structure itself. A temple that speaks through silence, whispering, she mattered. To the Maya, death wasn't an ending. It was a liminal state, a sacred portal to the otherworld. That otherworld was Xibalba, a shadowed realm of gods, riddles, and tests. And for a figure as significant as the Red Queen, this passage was layered. Spiritual, royal, and mythic. Every part of her burial served a purpose. It was not just about remembrance, but about readiness. Burial ceremonies were grand, myth-woven performances, designed to help the soul navigate a treacherous beyond. Maya imagery tells us Xibalba was no paradise. It was a realm of danger, rivers of blood, trials by gods. Only those who were ritually prepared, spiritually armored, could survive its layers. And the Red Queen, wrapped in red powder, sealed in stone, surrounded by sacred relics. She was clearly being prepared not just for rest, but for journey and for divine recognition. The ritual items in her tomb, the bone needles, the obsidian knives, they weren't just symbolic. They were tools of transformation. They marked her as someone of power, a woman destined to walk the spiritual path with strength. Hint at rites of auto-sacrifice, perhaps symbols of rituals she once performed, or ceremonies reenacted at her burial to empower her soul. Her jade funerary mask, pieced together with care, was far more than decoration. It likely served as a sacred vessel, preserving her face, her essence, as she passed into the next realm. The Maya believed the face reflected the soul, and for the gods to receive her, they had to recognize her identity. The ceramic jars placed around her may have contained cacao, maize drink, water, or pulque, offerings to sustain her spirit in the world beyond. Other objects, like stingray spines and shell trumpets, could have symbolized ritual instruments, tools to summon deities or mediate with the divine. For the Maya, burial wasn't simply a farewell. It was a sacred transformation. They saw death as the planting of a seed, and burial as part of the cycle of renewal. Royal figures like kings and queens were viewed as living manifestations of the gods, and in death, they returned to those divine origins. The Red Queen, bathed in crimson, laid in a sacred structure, surrounded by reverent gifts. She wasn't just being mourned. She was being prepared to reawaken, not as a woman, but as a being tied to cosmic balance. Her burial wasn't the closing chapter. It was the start of her myth. Just steps away from her eternal chamber stands one of the most revered tombs in all of Mesoamerica, that of Kinich Janib Pakal. Known to us as Pakal the Great, his resting place, inside the towering Temple of the Inscriptions, is admired for its grandeur, symbolism, and spiritual architecture. But what makes the Red Queen's burial truly exceptional is not just what was found within it, but where it lies. Her stone coffin was hidden within Temple 3, directly neighboring Pakal's majestic monument, in Palenque, a city where every building's position held sacred significance. That proximity speaks volumes. It wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate, a message carved into architecture. Many researchers now believe the Red Queen was Tizakbu Ajah, Pakal's queen and closest confidant. Though her tomb bears no name, the parallels between her burial and Pakal's are undeniable. Both entombed in pyramids, both cloaked in cinnabar, both surrounded by jade offerings, both honored with profound reverence. Their funerary rituals reflect one another, two pieces of the same sacred legacy. Just as Pakal's lid shows his descent into the underworld, through the underworld tree, a grand cosmic tableau of death and renewal. The Red Queen's tomb holds no such imagery, but its meaning lies in placement. If Pakel symbolized the sun's journey, disappearing into night and rising anew, then she may have been the moon, that guiding feminine force that follows, its own hidden, sacred path across the heavens. Together, they embody duality, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, ritual and balance. In my belief, rule wasn't about one. It was a shared responsibility. The universe demanded harmony, and harmony began at the throne. By entombing her beside Pakel, they weren't just preserving marriage. They were sealing a cosmic order. Even in death, their closeness spoke volumes. Not a queen behind, but beside her king. Not a figure of support, but a co-architect of legacy. Their tombs speak in silence. Two lives encased in cinnabar and limestone. Two spirits eternally intertwined. This is one of history's quietest, yet most profound expressions of power. Her name may be lost, but the Red Queen of Palenque still reigns as one of the most mysterious and powerful women in the ancient world. Her crypt, untouched for over 1,300 years, now speaks to us, softly but persistently. Each discovery raises more questions than it answers. She remains a mystery. No inscription names her, no stele recounts her story, and yet the reverence in her burial, the vivid red powder, the precious jade, the precise construction of her tomb, they all tell us she mattered, not just as a wife or partner, but as a person of deep significance. The Red Queen challenges the old narratives. She proves that Maya women held not just symbolic value, but real power. They led ceremonies, guided cities, and influenced generations. For too long, kings like Pakel have dominated the story, but her reappearance shifts the spotlight, reminding us that power flowed through mothers, sovereigns, priestesses, and visionaries alike. Her greatest legacy may not lie in what she possessed, but in the questions she inspires. Archaeologists, scholars, artists, storytellers, all continue to revisit her tomb, drawn by the mystery, moved by the silence. Every jade pendant, every layer of crimson dust, every architectural decision in Temple 3, they all echo a single truth. This woman was not an afterthought. She was a pillar in the sacred narrative. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part. Not what we've uncovered, but what we still don't know. She left behind is only part of the story. What's more powerful is the conversation she sparked among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers alike. Each jade ornament, each veil of cinnabar, every architectural alignment in Temple 3, they all whisper something deliberate. This woman mattered. And perhaps the most astonishing part of her story isn't what we've learned, but what still eludes us. The Red Queen reminds us that history isn't a fixed record of facts. It is a living puzzle, a shared yearning to touch the lives of those who came before us. And in that way, her story continues to unfold. She lies in red, the color of life, sacrifice, blood, and rebirth, once hidden behind jade. Her face now looks back at us. Through science, art, and awe, she has no name, but she has a voice. She remains a mystery, but she is not forgotten. The Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death, she commands something greater. Our collective imagination, entombed in stone, her narrative was etched in silence. And still, she speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907. In the spirited town of Coyoacán, then a quiet village on the edge of Mexico City. Her childhood home, La Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a world bursting with contradiction, color, and quiet strength. It would later become a sanctuary, a battlefield, and eventually a museum honoring one of the 20th century's most iconic artistic voices. Frida was the third of four daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic with indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were contrasts in human form. Guillermo, quiet and intellectual. Matilda, deeply religious and emotionally distant. Frida inherited her father's introspective eye and her mother's unshakable grit. As a child, she was curious, fierce, and unafraid to question the world. She devoured books and asked the kind of questions that made adults uncomfortable. But at age 6, her world changed. She contracted polio. The disease left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. She masked the difference with long skirts, but never let it define her. Confined to bed for months, cut off from other children. Her imagination blossomed in solitude. She grew especially close to her father, who encouraged her to stay active, riding bikes, doing exercises, and keeping her mind sharp. Unlike many girls of her era, Frida had no desire to become a housewife. Her ambition was to be a doctor. At just 15, she earned admission to Mexico City's prestigious National Preparatory School, one of only a few girls accepted. She quickly stood out, not just for her intellect, but for her sharp humor, bold opinions, and an unmistakable sense of style. Frida became part of a rebellious circle of students known as Los Cachuches, young thinkers who spent their days debating literature, philosophy, and politics. She was pulled toward revolutionary ideas, eager to challenge tradition and authority. Even before the accident that would change her body, before the fame that would define her legacy, Frida was already carving herself into the world, with raw defiance, unfiltered thought, and a vision too bold to be boxed in. She wasn't just growing up in Coacon, she was reshaping herself into something entirely her own. Then came September 17th, 1925, a day that cleaved her life in two, before and after. That afternoon, Frida boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias. After school, they were joking, teasing, probably even arguing. Frida never did things in halves. But moments later, a streetcar smashed into the bus, and in an instant her future exploded into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was devastating. The streetcar slammed the bus against the wall, splintering the wood and tossing passengers like rag dolls. Frida was impaled by a steel handrail. It entered through her hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine cracked in 3 places. Her right leg was shattered. Her foot was torn from its socket. Her collarbone and ribs were broken. Her shoulder dislocated. Her abdomen pierced. She was just 18. A man covered her with a borrowed coat. Another bystander noticed. Her broken body glittered, not from blood, but from gold powder. She had been carrying it in a pouch, and it burst in the crash, coating her in what looked like shimmering ash. She was rushed to the Red Cross hospital and endured a series of surgeries. She spent weeks in a full-body cast, unable to move, her body racked with infection and uncertainty. The dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away with each passing day. But in that enforced stillness, something began to awaken. Her father gave her a set of paintbrushes. Her mother constructed a custom easel that could hang over her bed. A mirror was fixed above her canopy, so she could see her own reflection. And there, flat on her back, in pain but surrounded by color, Frida began to paint. Covered in plaster, surrounded by pain, Frida began to paint. At first, simply to pass the time. But soon, it became a fixation. Her first subject was the only one available. Herself, not out of ego, but because looking inward was all she could do. What emerged wasn't self-admiration. It was survival. Though the accident had shattered her body, it also unlocked something else. A gateway into her mind, her pain, her sense of self. And from that space, she began to speak through paint, building a visual language of anguish, resilience, and identity. The girl who once dreamed of healing others was now trying to heal herself, one image at a time, lying still in a rigid cast, breathing through pain. Frida painted not just to cope, but to translate what couldn't be said. What began as therapy evolved into a visual voice, intensely intimate, unapologetically raw, and difficult to ignore. That was the purpose. Frida wasn't interested in painting flowers or peaceful fields. She painted suffering, her own bodily pain, emotional grief, existential fear. She painted herself again and again, not out of narcissism, but because, in her words, I paint myself because I'm often alone, and I know myself best. Her early works were modest in size, done on tin or wood, inspired by Mexican retablos, religious paintings that told stories of hardship and divine mercy. But Frida turned this tradition inward. Her own body became her sacred subject. Her inner world became the chapel. She painted herself as pierced, as divided, as openly wounded. In one painting, nails puncture her skin, a saint in agony. In another, she hovers in a desolate scene, held upright only by a crumbling column, a direct symbol of her broken spine. She painted her grief, her fragmentation, her vulnerability. Her spine, broken in places, became a symbol she returned to again and again. She painted herself as grieving, as fragmented, as stripped bare, but never as helpless, always alert, always aware. She didn't shy away from discomfort. Frida painted trauma as it truly was, unfiltered, unflinching, yet filled with wit, boldness, and, at times, even humor. Each canvas reclaimed her body, her memories, and her place as a woman in a society that constantly tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just recounting her life. She was inventing a new artistic language, one that fused folk traditions, surreal dreams, medical precision, and layered symbolism. Her works became emotional autopsies, surreal and spiritual, framed in color, culture, and ancient myth. By the time she regained the ability to walk, slowly and in pain, Frida was no longer the same girl who had once dreamed of medicine. She had emerged as something else, an artist and a force. She had taken the darkest moment of her life and shaped it into power. Frida Kahlo didn't just portray pain, she made the world face it. And in doing so, she transformed suffering into a sacred, expressive act. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, just 21 years old, Frida met a man who would become the storm and the center of her life, Diego Rivera. He was over 2 decades older, already a legend in Mexican art, a commanding figure, both physically and artistically. Rivera's massive murals, political, powerful, and deeply Mexican, were etched across public walls. Frida had admired his work before, but now she wanted his eyes on hers. She boldly approached him, paintings in hand, and asked, "Do you think I have talent?" Diego, stepping down from his scaffolding, studied her work. His answer was clear. "Yes, and I'm not just being nice." In her, he saw something real, raw, searing emotion, unfiltered truth, and a striking beauty wrapped in pain. Their bond began, as intense as it was chaotic. Frida would later remark, "I experienced 2 major accidents in life. One was the streetcar, the other was Diego." They married in 1929, a match that baffled many. He was large, often unfaithful, and world-renowned. She was outspoken, fiercely proud, and already leaning on a cane. Frida's own parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their love was stormy but creative. Diego championed her talent and encouraged her growth, but his infidelities, including one with her sister, left Frida shattered. She, too, sought solace in others, with both men and women. There were whispered names: Leon Trotsky, Georgia O'Keeffe. Eventually, the tension broke. In 1939, they divorced. They remarried just a year later, but with new conditions. This time, Frida would keep her independence, her home, her finances, and her name. Their second union wasn't based on convention, but on shared creativity and mutual recognition. Despite the infidelities and emotional scars, Diego remained a foundational presence in her life. He pushed her, he hurt her, but he also supported her. As a painter, a revolutionary, and a visionary redefining art itself. Together, they were far from harmonious, but together, they became unforgettable. In the 1930s, Frida traveled with Diego Rivera to the United States, to cities like San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, as he fulfilled major mural commissions. These travels exposed Frida to American industry, its wealth, and its contradictions. She was confronted by the extremes of capitalism, and what she saw left her uneasy. Frida was fiercely patriotic, deeply committed to communism, and passionate about indigenous culture. Seeing luxury amid the widespread poverty of the Great Depression only sharpened her discomfort. In her letters, she criticized the American obsession with appearances and consumption. She longed for the raw, colorful, and contradictory beauty of Mexico. While Diego was creating monumental public works, Frida turned inward, crafting smaller, more intimate pieces. On tin and canvas, her style became distinct, vivid, surreal, emotionally charged, and deeply personal. During this period, she created some of her most enduring self-portraits. She didn't paint herself out of ego, but out of necessity. Her body, always aching from past trauma, surgeries, and the heartbreak of a miscarriage in Detroit, became her subject. In her art, she appeared wounded, fragmented, vulnerable, yet always composed, always confronting the viewer, with steady eyes. In Henry Ford Hospital, she lies on a blood-stained bed, crying, surrounded by haunting symbols. A fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a fractured pelvis. It was a painting stripped of pretense, a declaration of grief, in bold color. Returning to Mexico, Frida threw herself into leftist activism. She and Diego even opened their home to Leon Trotsky during his exile. She wore Tehuana dresses, not just as clothing, but as a declaration of cultural pride and resistance. Her wardrobe, like her art, was inseparable from her beliefs. Every thread carried meaning. In Frida's world, identity, body, and ideology merged on the canvas, while Diego painted sweeping murals about revolution and history. Frida painted its intimate cost, the fragmented body, the burning mind, and the unflinching gaze of the self. In exile and in sickness, she became more than a painter of pain. She became a symbol of resistance. By the time she returned to Mexico, in the late 1930s, Frida was no longer seen merely as Rivera's wife. She had evolved into a powerful artist in her own right, whose work radiated with raw vulnerability, mythic imagery, and cultural depth. Back home, she stepped fully into her identity. Her house, the Blue House in Coyoacán, became a living canvas. Its vivid blue walls, yellow accents, Aztec relics, and freely roaming monkeys and parrots all expressed her spirit. It was a home of paradox, traditional yet rebellious, sacred yet playful. Inside, she filled every corner with pre-Columbian sculptures, folk icons, offerings, and revolutionary writings. She braided flowers into her hair, wore bold indigenous fabrics, and painted amidst the aromas of incense and the music from the streets. It was during this time that her creativity soared. Her paintings grew more layered, rich with political symbolism, personal metaphor, and emotional intensity. In the two Fridas, she revealed a divided identity. One version dressed in European attire, with a bleeding heart, the other strong, resolute in traditional clothing. It was her visual diary, an open wound of love, loss, and belonging. In 1939, she showcased her art in Paris, earning the admiration of Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky, all captivated by her originality. Yet even as surrealists tried to claim her, Frida refused their label. They thought I was surrealist, she said, but I never painted dreams. I painted my reality. Her reality was Mexico, not in glossy brochures, but in its raw, vibrant truth. Her canvases throbbed with symbols, bones, birds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored her homeland's indigenous roots while exposing its historical and current wounds. But as her voice as an artist strengthened, her body continued to betray her. Surgery after surgery, persistent infections, and unrelenting pain became her daily battle. Frida came back to Mexico not to retreat, but to reclaim herself through art, activism, and unapologetic self-expression. As the 1940s progressed, Frida Kahlo's physical condition worsened. Her spine crumbled, her right leg suffered constant infections, and her life became a cycle of surgeries, more than 30 in total, many painful, one after another. She spent long periods confined to bed, her body wrapped in plaster, or pulled by medical devices that stretched her bones in excruciating attempts to heal. Still, she painted. Each canvas became a defiant cry, a declaration of survival through suffering. Her paintings turned darker, more intense, more direct. There was no hiding. In the broken column, she showed herself cleaved in half, her body pierced by nails, an ancient column, cracked and fragile, standing in for her shattered spine. Yet her face was calm, her stare unwavering. She did not flinch from pain. She stared it down. Her political convictions also burned brighter. A proud communist, Frida protested oppression, wrote fiercely worded letters, and condemned injustice in all forms. When walking became impossible, she showed up at protests in her wheelchair, signs raised, voice raised, a presence impossible to ignore. In 1953, Frida received her first solo exhibition in Mexico, long overdue recognition of her art, but her health was failing. Doctors told her she couldn't attend, so she made her entrance by ambulance, laid out on a hospital bed in the gallery itself, wearing traditional dress, surrounded by her paintings. She welcomed guests with laughter, with tequila, and with the same fierce spark in her eyes. Her final paintings were a blend of innocence and intensity. In Marxism will give health to the sick, she depicted herself in a steel brace, cradled by Marx's hands, while the chains and symbols of oppression were cast aside. Her last known piece? A still life of sliced watermelons, one wedge boldly declaring, "Viva la vida, long live life." Even with death approaching, Frida remained bold, joyful, political, and unafraid. Her final self-portraits were not mere paintings. They were declarations, revolutionary and alive, painted through pain, but always signed with defiance. On July 13th, 1954, at just 47 years old, Frida Kahlo passed away in the same place she was born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official report listed a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her suspected more, a final surrender. After years of unrelenting pain, endless operations, and the quiet toll of battling her own body, just days earlier, she had joined a protest against the CIA-led coup in Guatemala. Weak in a wheelchair, but unyielding, her fist raised in resistance. Revolution pulsed through her to the very end. Her last diary words were haunting. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's cultural heart, draped in a red communist flag. Her casket was surrounded by artists, loved ones, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was shattered. He called her the deepest love of his life, despite the betrayals that once nearly destroyed her. Yet in the years after her death, something remarkable happened. Frida Kahlo refused to fade. At first, only artists spoke her name. Her style was hard to define. too political for surrealists, too surreal for the traditional art world. But slowly, her face, her story, her fearless voice, they began to grow louder. During the feminist movements of the 1970s and 1980s, activists and scholars resurrected lost voices. Frida's became a roar. She wasn't just an artist anymore. She became a symbol of strength forged through pain, of feminism expressed in rebellion, of unapologetic Mexican identity, of queerness, disability, and truth. The flowers woven into her hair became a signature. Her house transformed into a museum. Her personal writings were treated like sacred scripture, and her paintings, once intimate outcries, now hang on the walls of the world's most renowned galleries. Frida Kahlo spent much of her life overshadowed by Diego Rivera. But in death, she stepped forward, not just as a painter, but as a mirror daring us to stare back, not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida's image is everywhere, on T-shirts, painted across murals, reimagined as dolls, memes, posters, icons. That unibrow, the floral crown, her unwavering stare, all instantly recognizable. But her power isn't in fame. It's in what we recognize behind the face. Frida never claimed perfection. She didn't conform, and she didn't pretend to. In a world chasing flawless illusions, she gave us raw truth. Truth that was bold, tangled, passionate, furious, and radiant. She made art from every part of who she was. Her disabilities, her queerness, her political fire, her Mexican heritage, and in doing so, created something timeless. Frida Kahlo became more than an artist. She became a symbol of rebellion, of feminism, of cultural identity, of fierce creative freedom. To the LGBTQ plus community, she's a trailblazing bisexual icon who loved openly in a world that demanded silence. To women, she's proof that you don't need permission to be powerful. To artists with disabilities, she's a testament. That chronic pain doesn't kill the artist. It sharpens a brush. To Mexico, she's a daughter returned, wild-rooted, eternal. Her canvases, once considered too strange or too personal, now hold sacred space. Works like the two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column, aren't just admired. They're felt, especially by those who turned their own pain into meaning. She lived on the margins and turned those margins into the spotlight. She embraced contradiction, a communist who wore gold, a betrayed woman who still believed in love, a body broken, a soul unshaken. And through it all, her paintings carried more than pigment. They carried purpose. Frida Kahlo didn't set out to become a legend. She just told the truth, unfiltered, unpolished, unstoppable. And through her truth, countless others finally saw themselves, reflected in art, because now when we look at her face, we don't see loss. We see bravery. We see beauty. We see resistance. We see Frida, not gone, but eternal.